as I think you have the background, but as you know, we already provided a previous meeting to let's say showcase some of the four user journeys that we have already identified and so on, and Claudia already introduced by email and so on. Now we are focusing on some specific targets, and today as wallet providers and so on. We'll now maybe introduce again some of the key points, but I think that what will be valuable for us today is from your perspective as wallet providers, take your insight about what are the key points, the difficulties, the things that should be taken into account to enable to ensure real interoperability from EU to Canada, Canada to EU, or abroad, right? That's the point. Huh? So to identify the use cases, we have already identified some key dimensions, let's say, the trust models and trust services. That's something that of course, is not just about the identity of a legal entity as an education institution or a citizen, right, as a natural person. It's also, at least in Europe, and maybe here we'll find some difference and so on. In Europe, it's also about the governance, about how education works, and how a legal entity is authorized by an authority to act on a specific domain, like the educational one. In Europe, there's, let's say, no centralized authority for that. I think it's the same in Canada, but then we can have several models and so on. And that may be also from a wallet perspective, right, or from an issuer or from a verifier, maybe makes things a little bit, let's say, more complex, right? Maybe more rich, but more complex, right? So there are several things that need to be taken into account. That's why we already identify these several key elements, right? The nationality, and maybe we can move forward to the next slide, maybe, Claudia, because at the end we identify these elements, and then at the end the four use cases are just combination of whether the citizen is from Canada or Europe, where the wallet is from Canada or Europe. This is the main matrix, right? For scenario A, we have a EU citizen, EU using a EU wallet, right? Then the issuer, the educational institution, issues the credential is from EU. The attestation format, because this is also something that we already find that there are some differences, even within Europe. Things are not, let's say, standardized. That's something that is actually going on linked to the EIDAS review and so on. But in any case, the attestation format is also important. And of course, the verifier in this case is from Canada. So in this journey, we can identify a EU student that has achieved a baccalaureate degree and wants to enroll, for example, right, in Canada for a master degree. This should be how to apply it. Then we identified some equivalence with scenario B, but in this case, it's a Canadian citizen. Here, one of the first findings that we found, and for that there will be also a parallel workshop with EU representative and Canadian representative to talk about the trust framework, the trust identity trust framework, and so on. So here in Canada, with also the partners that are working together with the project, we found that there's the Canadian trust framework, but still maybe it's unsure about the adoption. It's mandatory, yes, not. It's for all. It's for legal entities and natural persons, yes, not. Are educational institution aspect they using also the Pan-Canadian trust framework, yes, no. These are some findings that we still need to work on. Remember that the project is just about that, about finding what are the gaps, what are the barriers, or what are the opportunities from for a cross-border, for a cross-border, let's say, interoperability between EU and Canada. So here we have the Canadian citizen, Canadian wallet, the issuance institution is from Canada. And once you move to EU, so the verifier will be from Europe, and the attestation, the credential format will be here. We already also find some findings that there maybe there's also an opportunity or not, right, to use a common format, at least for a broad interoperability in Canada. There are several formats that are in use as per today in the different regions that we have found. So here we have some things still to work with, and maybe you can also provide some feedback here, or some I think some feedback or some findings, some opportunities. Then combination C and D, scenario C and D are just combining EU citizen, Canadian wallet, or the other way up. So these are the four key, the use case matrix that we already use to identify the scenarios. Next slide, Claudia, please. So all the scenarios, and I think that those were shared also, Claudia. The scenarios were already shared with everyone. Yeah, okay. So this is just to explain the four scenarios, A, B, C, D, follow the same, let's say, skeleton, the same structure. And the code is the scenario, A, B, C, whatever, right? Brief description. Then also we introduce the actors, blah, 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 these things. And then also on high level, what are the steps that needs to be done? And next slide, please, Claudia. Maybe there's some delay there. Okay. Okay, then there were the high-level steps, but then, of course, there are detailed or more details, deeper details for each of the steps, because it's important to identify all the key elements that we discussed before. If we are talking about the nationality, right, of the issuer, okay, then we need to find out, okay, how that can be proved, how the issuer within a credential, how we can reach who is the issuer, how can you verify who the issuer really is it entitled or authorized by someone, yes, no, blah, 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 all this stuff. So we have described in detail each of the steps, adding those key elements that should allow us to understand for all the key elements that we have already commented before, what are the main difference or equivalences that need to be established between EU and Canada, right, to be able to, at the end, automate, right, the interoperability. Next slide, please, Claudia. Okay, and these are the high-level description of the four scenarios, as I said before, but keep this in mind always. EU citizen, EU wallet, EU credential format to Canada, or Canadian citizen, Canadian wallet, Canadian format to EU, and then combinations, EU citizen, Canadian wallet, or Canadian citizen, EU wallet. Okay, I'm moving from one side to the other. Next slide, please, Claudia. Thanks. And I think we already share just to so to be able to prepare, because I think what really makes sense is open the discussion, because you are really the ones that are implementing and the ones that really can reach the knowledge. But we added here some, let's say, questions, but just to guide the discussion. I feel free. I think we can open the discussion right now, but maybe we can follow this structure, and up to you. I think maybe we can, as you can see, there are three main scopes here. First one is about adoption and usage, about your solution or your knowledge about how things are at this point as per today, and so on. But also, of course, it's important for us to understand not just how things are as per today, but also, has it been difficult? Yes, not. Or where are the difficulties? Where are the barriers, right? Or what can be done to facilitate, right, this move to the digital credentials and the cross-border interoperability. Then we also have this cross-border, let's say, functionality, right? Of course, always the EU side, the Canadian side. The two main points are exactly the same, and then of course, and relates to the elements that we have already identified before. And the last one is alignment with the trust frameworks, the EIDAS on EU side, and maybe right the Pan-Canadian trust framework on Canadian side. I think I don't know how do we want to move forward. If we want to make an open discussion, if we want to move step by step, if maybe Irene, you want to start first, and we can maybe touch point by point. I don't know.
Look, Luis, I don't know if you can see the chat box, but Adam has already asked, or suggested, that MICRES could be leveraged as an example of a trust registry for issuer identity in Canada.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, that matrix that you had defined there, do we have another matrix that's sort of the next layer of detail for our actual interoperability profiles? Or would that be that? Because I guess what I'm thinking of is if we do want to actually interoperate across, a GATACA service and a MATTR service, we are going to need to get to the layer of issuance protocol, presentation protocol, credential schema, actual proof formats, signature schemes, actual verifiable identifiers, things.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right, Adam. Maybe I missed some of the points. So on the one side, because this project is about EBSI, or how EBSI can be, let's say, reused, right, to ensure interoperability between EU and Canada. So you're right. So we focus on the format, but it's really not on the credential format. It's on the profile. You're absolutely right. Of course, the data model of the format is one of them, but on the, let's say, on the EBSI side, right, we are using verifiable credentials with the verifiable credentials data model from the CBC. We are using OpenID for verifier for BC for issuance. We are using OpenID for BP for presentation. And then what EBSI provides, let's say, EBSI, it's a decentralized PKI trust framework, right? That contains, let's say, where you can store, right, in form of registries, trusted registries, right, all the governance. So we have TIR, Trusted Issuer Registry, where all the issuers are registered to be registered using decentralized identifiers, the IDs, to be registered, or to self-register, you need to follow a governance process. So, for example, in Spain, you have the Ministry of Universities that is in charge of higher education, for example. And then university, right, shares its DID to the ministry. Ministry verifies, yes, this is the university, this is the DID that you will use, and then authorize the university to self-register by themselves its DID on the Trusted Issuer Registry. But also adds or issues on, let's say, accreditation, verifiable credential, verifiable attestation, right? That accredits the university to be able to issue EQF, European Qualification Framework, diplomas level 4 to 6, for example. So it's not just to EBSI, it's not just about storing, let's say, the identity trust framework, right? It's also about the governance of the education, and is able to support all member states' governance, at least per today. Okay, that's one thing. Then, of course, we have the EBSI profile that follows, as said before, verifiable credential data models, the IDs that are stored in EBSI, and so on, so on, so on. So this is the key point. What we are trying to do with this exercise is try to understand how things work in Canada and how things could match. That's why, for example, there will be a meeting with with a representative of the Treasury to that they are working on the bank and trust framework, right? To understand from an identity, a national identity perspective, legal perspective, right? How that works and how that fits with the EIDAS trust framework, for example. And that is the one that works is in use here in Europe. And moving to education, we should be able to understand more or less the same. How education governance works in Canada, how a legal entity becomes, for example, a higher education institution. Is there's some authority, central authority in Canada? Yes, not. What are the let's say the rules, governance rules to become an education institution? And that's one on one side, and on the other side, same for Europe, right? And then also, for example, in Europe we have quality assurance mechanisms. So some, let's say, added attestations, added seals can be added to the diploma, and so third parties can then value that it's not just presenting me a degree, an engineering, computer engineering degree, whatever, but also that degree has a quality seal, and that means that the issuer is doing things correctly, blah blah blah, all this stuff. So the exercise that we are performing here is try to understand how things work in Canada, how and what is required, or how to facilitate interoperability in Canada and Europe. Of course, the wallet plays a role here, right? Because it's where the citizen will all store and share the credentials, and that's the point. With previous meetings with some of the partners, we already we were able to understand that identity is one thing that maybe now the bank and the trust framework, but we are unsure about the status of and maturity of and level of adoption of the bank and the trust framework. So that's why there will be a parallel meeting with between EU representatives and Canadian representatives for that. But you are the ones that are really working with it. So if you also can provide the feedback on that, for us, fine. At the end, when someone in Canada will share a credential to someone in some verifier, right, some relying party in EU, how that third party should be able to gather the credential, request and gather the credential. That's one thing. And that really links to the wallet, right? Then how is able to open the credential and understand from a semantic perspective what's inside, and maybe do equivalence and so on. But before that, they also need to verify the authenticity of the credential. That means the integrity and authenticity. That means who the issuer really is. If they need to follow some governance, education governance rules, can we verify that? That yes, this entity was entitled to issue this credential and so on. You got my point, Adam?
Yeah. No,
and also,
definitely.
Irene just raised her hand, so sorry.
So I guess from everything that that I'm hearing and reading at the questions that you placed, to me there are two distinct problems. One is how to ensure adoption, and the second is how to achieve interoperability, which might be a slightly more legal/technical question. So there are two different things that kind of related, but I would like to kind of address them separately. As per the adoption side, I think there are different challenges associated with regards to interoperability. So for adoption, for me, one of the main problems that we're facing as a community in general is that this is a three-sided market. And you have to convince users to do this, but then they say, okay, what can I use it for? And you say, well, not yet anywhere, but it will be great for you, but there is no incentive. And then you go to the relying parties and you say, hey, you need to implement this because you will be able to onboard users instantly, and they say, yeah, how many users do you have? Well, none yet, but they will come. And then you need to convince issuers, you need to issue in this new format. It will be amazing for you. And I will say, like, yeah, why? And then it's a very delicate balance to raise these three markets at once. And the only thing to create this is, for instance, EBSI, I think, did it great with this early adopters program, where they kind of incentivized all issuers and relying parties to start working together. That's one thing. Another potential solution for that, I really like the higher education use case, mainly because in itself it's a closed market. It's an issuer, it's a verifier, and it has the student base, which are the users needed for it. So I truly believe that higher education has the potential to become the spark that the whole ecosystem needs, because then universities get, have some partners that offer discounts to students, the transportation system offers discounts. Like from there, you can grow up into different sectors. So that's one challenge, potential solutions. The other one, the other challenge that I've seen in terms of adoption is that today there are very few organizations willing to try. And when we link this to interoperability, it's important to test this on the field. Because we've been working on cross-border scenarios within Europe, but that real life experience allowed us to identify a lot of challenges that we would not have identified otherwise, like just by defining standards and specs, not enough. You really need to do that on the field and get to work with another provider, another country, or another university from another place, because they have different governance models. They are used to different data models. And this is when everything pops up, when you're really on the field. So I think that one piece missing for this, like if we really want to encourage this cross-border interoperability between Canada and the EU, is that we really need to engage higher education institutions from both sides willing to do these tests. And as per interoperability, the main challenges that I've seen are twofold. The first one is the constant change in standards and specifications. As a technology provider, sure, we're OpenID Connect for VC, for VPI, great. You implement one version. Next thing you know, there is another draft. And then you try to implement interoperability with another vendor, and the first question is, what version are you following? Oh, that's incompatible with mine. And upgrading to another version, it's a lot of resources, and you only make that effort once you know either the version is stable or it's worth it, because the majority of players in the community are supporting that specific version. So in the end, even if you say, this exchange protocol, there's a lot of nuances into the specific version of those protocols, and they're evolving. And then it's like Europe, the ARF and EIDAS is supporting a specific version, then EBSI another one. And so this whole versioning in standards and protocols makes interoperability really hard from a tech provider's perspective, really, really hard. And the last one for me is everything related to trust frameworks. So in Europe, we've been using EBSI, like Luis, you know it, we've been supporting EBSI from the very, very beginning. We're integrated with EBSI, but we were born with the mindset that EBSI was going to be used for one specific environment, either sector-wise or geographic-wise, was becoming the trust framework for a specific set of use cases. But if I wanted to serve the US or Canada as a tech provider, I had to support other trust frameworks. I knew that. So kind of our architecture design always decoupled from the very beginning the implementation of everything related to digital identity and everything related to how to interconnect with different trust frameworks. We made that completely decoupled so I could integrate and federate a whole number of trust frameworks so that I could make that completely seamless to the end user. So as an end user, I could have in my wallet a credential issued by a higher education institution anchored in EBSI and national ID from the Canadian government anchored in the Canadian trust framework. And all of that, like the user doesn't need to know. And what they want is to manage everything from one place. But in order for that to happen, you can do two things. Either what we're doing right now, which is I, as a tech vendor, make the effort of integrating with all the trust frameworks that are out there, and I implement all this logic, and this is absolutely not scalable. Or we push for standard APIs, standard interfaces, and standard ways to register trust frameworks and governance models worldwide. And there are already a few efforts along these lines. We even donated some API proposal a long time ago to the DIF trying to address this problem. But we have a long way until we reach that. So this is obviously the standardization will take like a lot of time. So in the short term, we probably can work on more ad hoc analysis on how the trust framework in Canada and in the EU could work somehow, what similarities, what lessons learned we can take from each other so that we can export that as a suggestion for standardization while we work on ad hoc interoperability. But we should have in mind that this is not scalable, that we need to somehow work towards standardization. And I'll stop it. I've said a lot. But yes, an opening debate maybe can help.
Adam, your reflection to this?
Yeah, no, thank you, Irene. That's fantastic, and definitely resonates with me, and agree across the majority of that. And yeah, 100%. I mean, the separation between interoperability challenges and adoption challenges, I think they're entirely separate in separate topics, separate teams. Do you know what I mean? Separate initiatives that are both very large scale. So separating those, I think, 100%. And from the interoperability perspective, specific to education, education being even more challenging, I think there are two distinct segments of interoperability as well. As you mentioned, one is just technical interoperability and just allowing, an issuer backend to communicate with a wallet. That's like, machine level interop. And then second is actually understanding the information that comes across that protocol as being something that's valuable. So, with the rise of open badges, we've just gotten so much noise out there that, if someone sends across a critical thinking open badge to you as a reliant party, can you accept it? Do you know what it is? Can you trust it? All of those challenges, with regard to like mobility of credentials and mapping of like qualifications frameworks and things like that, which is a very long-standing problem, and why things like, World Education Services and those exist, right? So I think like just at a top level, there are two very distinct problems there from an interoperability perspective. The first being technical standards and technical interoperability, irrespective of the actual types or formats or structures, or I shouldn't say that, but like the types or information that's being communicated within those credentials. And then the second is, do I actually know what that thing is? Can I actually trust it? Does it meet my requirements? Does it meet my qualifications? So, and I think, yeah, in education, this is a longstanding problem, right? In Canada, we always get, the doctor from India comes to Canada, and then all of a sudden in Canada, they have to be driving Uber until they get their degree again, or things along those lines. So just to separate, like interoperability, as you mentioned, Louis, is very challenging if we're trying to solve all of that. On the first problem, this is, and Irene, I know that the standards are still moving into some extent, but we are getting very close to, somewhat ratified standards. And it was demonstrated with the JFF Plug Fest that, I think a couple dozen vendors interoperated, right? So, and that was utilizing OID for VCI, OID for VP, JOTS, as well as linked or data integrity proofs. So I think, yes, hear you, but it's possible, it's proven, we can definitely do that once we refine down and align on the right standards. And, we could immediately point to the JFF profile and, would be in really good shape to interop with that. And we can definitely then solve that first bucket of interoperability challenges. So just to provide some, direction there, that is absolutely possible and doable. Of course, understanding, there are mainly on the VP side of things, some breaking changes coming in there with regard to the query language as it evolves. But, we can always stick a line in the sand and integrate to it. The other piece is that also on the ISO side of things with regard to mobile driver's license or MDocs, a lot of convergence is happening there. And, we are pushing for, and utilizing MDocs quite significantly. So, part 5 is now, of course, for in-person, but I'd imagine education context, there are in-person use cases, and that would probably, or definitely would be the most standardized, ratified, like hard standard that's not really going to change in any meaningfully breaking way in the near term. And then part 7 for online presentment is there's also interoperability already taking place for part 7 as well. So in the Paris event last year, there was, I think, 20 plus vendors that interoperated on part 5, and then something like 10 plus that interoperated on part 7 as well. So that's already starting in Canada to consider. So Alex, I was just reading your question there, but so I think those are some considerations that we could work on as well. But I think that first problem, I think we can solve it. I just think we need to get that next layer, a few more layers of depth into that interoperability matrix. And then on the adoption side of things, I think we really do need to be talking to the reliant parties. So understanding, what are when we say use cases, meaning, where can we use these credentials? Is it immigration? Is it to get student loans? Is it to open, student bank accounts? What is it? Is it to get discounts, at different stores for, whatever it may be. So I think that side can then help to identify, what are the actual credentials that we need the schools to create, or is it, enrollment for graduate studies across borders or things like that, as you're mentioning as well. But I do think the reliant parties need to be at the table for this as well, if we're talking about proper adoption. So yeah, some thought. And then of course, just last piece around trust frameworks and trust registries and everything there. I think, PCTF as an example is great. And that would be more at the, can I actually trust the entity versus, and can I actually trust the information that's coming across? But the tech interop, where does how in flight, transactional or whatever else, how can I actually integrate with some sort of trust registry, like we're seeing with AMVA's digital trust service, kind of like we're seeing with the verified issuer certificate authority list out of part 5 in the ISO spec as well, is kind of like the current, only form of production trust registry today, really, that we're seeing, which is also similar process to what ICAO uses for their passports, all of our passports, I should say, as well. So just interesting to see, where that's going. And it seems like it is quite early for the convergence around that, but VICAL kind of being the standard you could point to that's being used by TSA for travel in the US, right? But yeah, that question also a good one that I think we'll need to think about. But, and MyCred's being one, ARUC, the association of, I think, Joanne potentially, would be a good one to point to in Canada. So I can pause there.
Okay, thanks. Maybe before going to the question to the chat, may I ask, because Irene, you talk about the issue about the reliant parties and so on. From a, let's say, citizen perspective, right? Because at the end, the one that really holds the wallet, right? Because I don't know, I assume that at the end, from a technical but also governance perspective, because when we're talking about profile matching, it's not just about technicalities; it's also about the governance of the credential itself and so on. But somehow, I think should be, let's imagine, right, that in Europe we are able to provide a common profile, and let's assume that maybe Canada also, then we should be able to do profile matching, right? But from not just the holder, also the verifier and so on. Should it be possible and make sense? And is this the most easy or recommended way to proceed? Because at the end, when an issuer could issue the credential, and that can be, let's say, defined or specified with more than one profiles, maybe the European one and the Canadian one. So the issuer issues the credential with the two profiles, and that's contained in the wallet. And then the holder can use it in, let's say, in Canada, but also in Europe, or the other way around. That maybe also will be easier for verifiers, right? They should decrease the barriers, right? Because they should not be able to implement all the type of verification for all the trust frameworks or blah, 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 all this stuff. Does it make sense? Yes, not. How we can ensure portability and of the credential is always be doing profile matching and adding converters from one side to the other on the other way around, or can the wallet play some game here that to facilitate to the holders, but also to verifiers, right? How that credential should be consumed in Canada, but also in Europe.
So first, our approach has been to delegate all that business logic to the wallet, so as to avoid to the maximum extent possible, or to release verifiers from that complexity. But again, this is the challenge where the wallet starts to become a very, very complex tool, because we're not talking about W3C, now we're talking also about ISO, and then we have different communication protocols, and then selective disclosures, ZKP is preferred on that side of the Atlantic. Here we're preferring as the yacht, and you start adding so much complexity to the wallet that it starts to worry me, the maintainability and scalability of the tech itself. Having said that, it's tech problems, so can be overcome, but the more complex, the more prone to errors, bugs, you name it. The simpler we can get it, the more robust it's, like, just by definition. I guess the question is, does it make sense to have this, say, a relying party or an issuer? Let's start with the issuer. Does it make sense to have this issuer? It's a European issuer, and it's anchored on the European Trust Framework. And now you have a Canadian verifier. Do you need, for this Canadian verifier to trust that this is an official issuer to be registered also in the Canadian Trust Framework? I guess that's the question. Can you federate somehow and provide a federated registry where you can simply ask, and you have a list of kind of approved trust frameworks, official trust frameworks, and you kind of just consult if it's within the federation, it's all checked? Or are you going to duplicate every single issue in every single place in every single trust framework? If you ask me, I would go for the federated model, because otherwise it will be impossible to keep all records updated and accurate. And onboarding, probably each trust framework will have their own onboarding flows, and you cannot make an issuer just get onboarded in every single trust framework everywhere. Like it's not scalable. So I guess the answer would be, okay, we need to provide some service or a means or a governance model by which, in this case, Canadian relaying parties, just to follow the same example, can trust issuers anchored on the European Trust Framework.
Yeah, fully agree. You already know that also European Commission has that let's say the third parties countries that they are, but the work that they do is just analyze other trust frameworks only for identity. That's also the point. Analyze the identity trust frameworks and then establish an equivalence between EIDAS and whatever, right? But yes, it makes sense that yeah, that's a point. That's a point. Okay, thanks, Irene. Maybe Alex, you can.
Oh, sorry.
Because I think you passed your copy and paste. Or Adam, you want to react to this? If not, maybe Alex can share some of the question.
No. I mean, I was just look. Luis knows this, okay? I've driven something on a nation scale basis in 2017 using blockchain and credentials. It was using block certs in my country, Malta. We became the first nation state to actually issue verifiable credentials which are notarized on the blockchain. Now, people will say, you only managed to do that because it's a small country, okay? To which my reply is, I used to actually map how many actors had to be engaged to get this to happen in terms of a small city, say, okay, let alone a country. And when I hear that universities are likely to be the most active and enthusiastic about this, our experience was the complete opposite. And by the way, I teach at a university, okay? So I was teaching this morning at the University of Malta. The one entity that decided to stay outside the system was the University of Malta. Do you know why? Because there's a CIO who hates the blockchain. That blocked everything. Everything. Till now. Actually, things are changing a bit now, 6 years later, because people have realized how much money is being paid for this system. So at some stage, guess what? People very high up, ministers, policymakers are now getting involved and saying, what are we paying for? So my experience till now has been to make this kind of change, even when it's large-scale pilots, you need two things. As a Gramsci would say, you need the carrot and the stick, okay? So the carrot normally is it's good for you, it's good for your students, it's good for this, it's good for that. The stick is at some stage, somebody says you're gonna have to do this. And this is where I think there are problems in all of this kind of stuff. Even the whole issue about federated systems, what I've learned till now, listening to some of these conversations, is that in Canada, there's no such a thing as a federated approach, but people do their own things. But guess what? Even in Europe, there is no such thing as a federated approach. Every single country does its own thing. Education is messy. So in a way, this is where I'm thinking, that's why I was asking about what incentives are there for key decision makers in Canada, say within even Canadian universities, because Adam, I think you said, there's an opportunity maybe there within Canadian university to consider EBSI-based solutions for verifiable credentials, because they might not even know what EBSI is. And the reply might be, we're all very well and good doing what we're doing. Thank you very much. I've got my own system there. I'm paying my own subscription fee. I've got to serve an SLA with someone I've trusted for 20 years. Go away. Ironically, in Malta, the same thing has now happened. Now that Blockset has been around for 6-7 years, I'm getting people who don't even know I was involved at the very beginning, but saying it's a large-scale pilot at some stage, and almost like telling me, go away, because it's working very nicely, thank you. Don't get involved. Human nature is something that resists change, from my experience. So if something like this is going to happen, what is it that can incentivize people in Canada to kind of say, maybe we should be doing this? And then my supplementary question was, what incentives could exist for these pilots in Canada, seeing that EBSI is getting some traction, as you rightly said, Irene, in terms of, some of these pilots are looking for people who are interested in getting involved. Maybe that's a little bit of the quiet success story, if at all, in terms of EBSI. So that's what my two questions were about, okay?
So to me, regarding the incentive question, they're only literally, it all comes down to 3 possible answers. Like either you save them money, or you give money, or you make them pay if they don't do it. Like it all comes to that. So it depends on who we're, like in our experience, when we're trying to engage relying parties, the conversation really, really varies. And I really related to your story about the CIO of the University of Malta really hating blockchain, and for that reason, getting out of the whole ecosystem. So what we do is, depending on the audience, if we're talking to the IT guy, decision maker, then it depends on his or her profile. It's all about, I'd save you a lot of time and money. If we're talking to the president of the universities, we're gonna make you make a lot of money. And the best scenario is Europe is gonna pay for this, you know? But in the end, they all either want to save money or get money out of this. That's all. So the thing that I believe worked well in Europe, at least in, for instance, EBSI, the early adopters program was not being a dime, but it managed to create FOMO. Somehow it's like, with this, it will come, you will have to do it anyway. This helped a lot. Is if you go early, you will have all of these benefits. So it's a kind of FOMO that EBSI managed to create very well. And then it created this kind of whole program and visibility, and then universities had access to high-level meetings with European Commission's decision makers. Like there was a lot of kind of soft value added into becoming part of the community. But when it really, really attracted attention from the right parties is when it released the money for the EBSI tender, and they funded Vector, and they funded Trace for You, and the money for large-scale pilots. This is when you really saw a bunch of organizations, like literally a multitude of organizations interested in this, because they were receiving money. So the fastest, in my opinion, the fastest way to get a large number of organizations involved is by giving them money to do this.
So then the carrot and stick, that's your carrot, right? The carrot is the money, and the stick is the fear of missing out, as you said.
Either, yeah, the stick is you will have to do this, and if you don't do this, you will have to pay a fine, or you will be missing out. Yeah. Either way, the first one is more powerful in terms of argument than the second one, of course. But if you manage to do the second version, well, you know. But it for us, it all has come to that. Like the conversation we've had with early adopters, so it worked very well for us. One of the main drivers by far was, EIDAS-B2 is coming. You will have to do this anyway. That was a big driver, and yet not enough. I have to say that. For me, organizations in many sectors, the answer was, okay, when it's approved, you come back.
Yeah, and maybe I can just add on there as well that sticks generally drive implementation, but they don't drive adoption. So if the government says you're going to get fined $500,000 per year that you don't comply with EIDAS 2.0, that's fine, and you're going to get an implementation. But users probably, and I mean, this is what we're seeing in the EU right now. We've been at a couple of events across the EU and across the UK, and the majority are saying that, you know, the regulatory driven approach is not going to drive adoption. It's going to drive implementation and potentially, you know, bad or you know, poor perspectives from users on a government forced mandates, if the value is not there for them to use these wallets in practice, right? So I think, you know, it's one way to get the code implemented. It's one way to say, you know, all of these states are doing these things, but it's not going to drive adoption until the, you know, business cases and values and incentives are aligned. So I think to kind of just unpack your comment there as well, Irene, that I totally agree with. You know, customer acquisition, if you can tell the school you're going to get, you know, 100,000 new students next year by doing this thing, of course, that's exciting. If you can say something around customer engagement, you know, your students are going to have such a better experience. They're going to have net new opportunities. And then if you can tell them that they're going to have a competitive advantage and market themselves better as well, then these are stories that, you know, you can start to get them excited. And say, hey, you can tap in here and tap in there, and you know, your customer base is going to be so much better, and your brand's going to be stronger, and things like that. I think is where the story can start to come together. So, but I totally agree. It's got to be a tangible business case for the relying party, whoever that may be, or the implementing party, whether it be an issuer or relying party or, you know, wallet vendor, et cetera. There does need to be a viable business case there, which of course is fairly nuanced, and, you know, we can create benefit statements and, you know, value in many different directions. But I do think that is what's going to drive proper sort of adoption, if you will.
I completely agree with Adam in this case. One of the points we find missing all along everywhere is a focus on usability and on UX of these technical solutions. Even we started an international working group trying to come together with other vendors, tech vendors, trying to think about how to drive user experience as a main driver for adoption. Because many of these discussions are very technical, but they're forgetting the user experience. Like people will, in the end, will not care about privacy, will not care about security. They all care about convenience. And it's a fact we need to work with. And the more convenient it is, the more it will be adopted. So the kind of the challenge here that we've encountered when focusing a lot on usability of the wallet in this case, which is the interface for the citizen, is that there are a lot of dependencies on the technical side. For instance, if I want to make the visualization of a credential nice and with the eSource logo and with some customization so it's easier identifiable in the wallet whatsoever, that requires extra fields in the data model. And that's not part of the standard. So we've tried to implement a lot of usability enhancements that make our wallet not interoperable with existing EIDAS, ARF, whatever you name it. So that's something that I would kind of, again, pop this up in this conversation, so that we should not forget that adoption will be driven by convenience for the end user, no matter how secure and how private we design it.
Mm-hmm. And if I may also, I think also it's important. It's almost related, but really important, I think, from an institutional perspective, the level of maturity on digitalization, because that's taking care about user experience, about UX, and so on. It also links to the level of maturity of both of the issuer, but also from the verifier. I think so, and I think we are still not at that level, right, of maturity, even in higher education. And I think there's also, let's say, a second barrier, because here we are not talking just about new mechanisms and we're also talking about new paradigm, right? Where the institution is not, let's say, the main actor, right? The citizen is the main actor. And I think that also it's a mindset, a barrier for existing education institutions. We need to change our mindset. We need to be more digitalized, let's say, to understand that we will be, fortunately, we will be part of a learning journey. The most, the better. But we are not the focus. The citizen is. I think that also matters, right?